Welcome to Theology Savage. It's Good Friday, and we're wrestling with the question: whose will was it to have Jesus crucified? We know the Romans ultimately laid the sentence of crucifixion upon Christ. Pontius Pilate, the charge: this is the King of the Jews. We know the Jews wanted and were plotting his death for quite some time. But we read in Isaiah 53, 700 or so years before the crucifixion, speaking of the Father and the prophecy of the servant of the Lord, who would, of course, be the Lord Jesus Christ. And it says this in Isaiah chapter 53, "Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief." And so you see the language there is that it was the Father's will to strike the Son, to have him die upon the cross, to put him to grief, to open shame, to make a public spectacle of him, with whom the Father was well pleased, the beloved Son with whom he is well pleased. And you have to ask the question, why would the Father do that? Well, the Father did that because of love, because of those he loved and chose in Christ to save, and Christ willingly went, more willingly than we've grievously sinned against God. Christ jumped in the fray to pursue us, to save us. And the second verse there, it says, "He shall see his offspring, and he shall prolong his days." And this speaks of Christ after making an offering, a guilt offering, a sin offering on the cross. He shall see his offspring, all the children God had given him. And that God the Father would prolong his days. That's referring to the resurrection. The resurrection's there in Isaiah chapter 53. And then it goes on to say in verse 11, this is probably one of the key texts in the Old Testament, "Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities." That's a fancy saying for double imputation. He shall make many to be accounted righteous. That means accounted obedient, faithful, righteous, ethically, morally upright. Christ makes many to be accounted righteous. The way he does that is by his perfect obedience to the will of the Father, to the law of God, loving neighbor, himself properly, his whole entire life. And then, of course, the second part of that, he shall bear their iniquities. That is the imputation, or God reckoning all the sins of those who would believe upon Christ on the cross, treating Jesus as if he was a blasphemer, an adulterer, a liar, a murderer, an idolater. All those sins that all who look to Jesus have committed were reckoned upon Christ. He bears their iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, Isaiah says earlier. And so Isaiah 53, speaking of the servant of the Lord Jesus Christ, the God-man, as he is accomplishing that salvation on this Good Friday, it certainly is good news. Be blessed.